So something you may not know about me is that I love watching road rage videos. I think they are hilarious. And there's this one that I saw recently where this guy gets rear-ended and chases after the guy who rear-ended him, and in the ensuing chase ends up swerving off the road, rolling his car and totaling it. This guy was angry, and understandably so. But the way that he responded to the situation ended up causing more damage to his car and himself than the thing that started the situation in the first place. And I think there's an important lesson that we can learn here. Sometimes, the way we choose to respond to a situation or a conflict can cause just as much damage to us and to others as the thing that started the conflict in the first place, even if that anger is justified. What's up, all you Bible-loving Jesus nerds? Welcome to First Methodist Youth. We are continuing our series on families, and we are calling it Atypical because God is calling us to be atypical in the way we relate to our families and the way our families relate to the world. One of the things that I learned from having roommates in college is that if you live with anyone long enough, you will find a reason to fight. I lived in a house with 5 of my best friends I had known for years, friends I had never had a single fight with. And we made it 3 months before we started our first yelling match. I love these guys. I would do anything for them. I would take a bullet for every single one of them. And I would never want to live with any of them ever again. And it's entirely possible that I am just a difficult person to live with. If you could see the pile of dishes just off screen, you would probably understand why. But I think there is a larger lesson for us to learn here, which is not that I am a terrible roommate, although the investigation is still pending. I think it's that conflict in relationships is not a glitch, it is a feature. And I think that's doubly true when it comes to our families. Whether we realize it or not, we hold our families to a higher standard than we do others. These are the people who are supposed to know us and love us more than anyone in the world. So when they hurt us, it freaking hurts. But like I said before, conflict is a feature of human relationships, not a glitch. We're all imperfect. And when those imperfections butt up against each other, you will have conflict, whether it's with your family or your friends or whatever else. Most of you have had conflict with your family. Most of you are probably in the middle of a conflict with your family. And you can choose to respond to that conflict in a way that is typical and makes things worse, or in a way that is atypical. So let's talk about this week's hot mess of a family, Abraham. You might remember him from such classics as pretending that his wife was his sister, almost sacrificing his son, and being the father of the nation of Israel. What a career. But the story we're going to look at today happens before any of that shenanigans. You might remember this from Sunday school. There was this one time when God was like, hey, Abraham, come hang out with me in the land of Canaan, and I'm going to bless you and make you super famous, and your descendants are going to become a powerful nation, and it's going to be awesome. What do you say? And Abraham's like, cool, sounds good. And it's kind of implied that this was supposed to be an exclusive thing between God and Abraham, but then in the very next verse, Abraham's nephew Lot ends up tagging along. And we don't know if Abraham invited him because he felt bad for Lot, or Lot was just bad at reading social cues, so he invited himself to the party. But basically, Lot is now the third wheel. So it's not a surprise that they get one chapter into their road trip and there's already problems. So we pick up in Genesis 13. This is verses 5 through 13. Lot, who was traveling with Abram, was also rich in sheep and cattle and tents. But the land couldn't support the both of them, and they had too many possessions between them. They couldn't both live there, and quarrels broke out between Abraham's shepherds and Lot's shepherds. The Canaanites and Perizzites? The Canaanites and Perizzites were also living in the land at the time. Abram said to Lot, let's not have fighting between us, between your shepherds and my shepherds. After all, we're family. Look around, there's plenty of land out there. Let's separate. If you go left, I'll go right. If you go right, I'll go left. Lot looked. He saw the whole plain of the Jordan spread out, well watered. This was before God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Remember that part. Well watered, like God's garden, like Egypt, and stretched all the way to Zoar. Lot took the whole plain of the Jordan. Lot set out to the east. That's how they came to part company, uncle and nephew. Abraham settled in Canaan. Lot settled in the cities of the plain and pitched his tent near Sodom. If this was a movie, that would be the part where the music goes bum, bum, bum. So we see that Abraham and Lot are like any normal family. They fought. There was conflict. We don't know who started it or how long it had been going on, but eventually it got so bad, all they could do was just walk away from each other. Literally had to move to different cities, which is a very human reaction. Sometimes all you can do in the middle of a conflict is just walk away for a bit. Get some distance. We're going to finish this story, but before we do, I want to give you guys a moment to discuss with your small groups. What's the dumbest thing that your family has disagreed about recently? When you have had a disagreement with your family member, how do you usually fight with them? Do you scream? Do you give them the silent treatment? Debate? Walk away? How does that go? And tell us about one big fight you've recently gotten into with a family member, and how did it get resolved? We'll see you back here in just one moment. All right, let's continue with this thing. So the next part of this story, I'm going to summarize because it's like 2 chapters long. But basically, that place that I told you to remember earlier, Sodom, well, they are literally the worst. And God decides he is just going to wipe them off the map. But Abraham seems to know that Lot lives there. And so he begins to beg God to spare the city. This is Genesis 18, starting in verse 23. Abraham confronted God. Are you serious? Are you planning on getting rid of the good people right along with the bad? What if there are 50 decent people left in the city? Will you lump the good with the bad and get rid of the lot? Good play on words there, Bible. Wouldn't you spare the city for the sake of those 50 innocents? I can't believe you do that. Kill off the good and the bad alike, as if there was no difference between them. Doesn't the judge of all the earth judge with justice? God said, if I find 50 decent people in the city of Sodom, I'll spare the place just for them. Abraham came back. Do I, a mere mortal, made from a handful of dirt, dare open my mouth against my master? What if the 50 fall short by 5? Would you destroy the city because of those missing 5? God said, I won't destroy it if there are 45 good people in the city. Abraham spoke up again. What if you only find 40? This goes back and forth for a while, but eventually Abraham whittles God down to 10 people. And God says, if there are 10 good people in the city, I will spare it from destruction. Spoiler alert, he doesn't even find 10 good people in the entire city. Now you might notice in this story that Abraham doesn't pray specifically for Lot. But what's interesting is that at the end of the story, God has saved Lot, despite the fact that there weren't even 10 good people in the city. And there's a little footnote at the end of this story in which it says that God spared Lot for Abraham's sake. So even though Abraham doesn't verbally pray for Lot in this situation, God seems to know what's in his heart and saves Lot's family. Okay, actually there's some caveat to that. Someone in the family does get turned into a pillar of salt, but we're going to table that one for now. Go read the story to find out why it's really interesting. The important thing about this story is the way Abraham responds to his conflict with Lot. Like I said, conflict is typical, and our response to that conflict is usually typical. We fight back and we hold grudges and we ignore each other. Sometimes we have to do what Abraham did and just get out of there. But then Abraham chooses to do something atypical. He chooses to pray for Lot. He didn't wait for an apology. He didn't try to win the argument. He didn't use the destruction of Sodom as a way to resolve the argument. It'd be a really messed up way to resolve the argument. No, instead he chooses to take the first step and invite God into the conflict through prayer. I know. In Sunday school, the answer is always prayer. But prayer, though simple, is atypical, and it can be extremely powerful when you're trying to resolve a conflict. One of the most frustrating things about people is that we can't control them. But what you can control is the way that you choose to respond to a conflict. And when we invite God into that conflict through prayer, we give up our need for control to let Him handle it. And while you may not be able to control the situation, God can change their heart and yours to put down your anger and understand each other. The great thing about prayer is that it doesn't have to be complicated. It could be as simple as thanking God for your family, even though you may not feel like it at the moment. Asking God to give you love and joy and peace and patience and all the other wonderful fruits of the Spirit. Asking God to give you wisdom to resolve your disagreement. Asking God to do the same for the family member you're fighting with. Take a moment to think about a recent disagreement that you've had with a family member, or maybe one that you're in the middle of, and imagine how that conflict could be transformed if you stopped to pray instead of fight. Imagine how it would change your attitude or your temper or your perspective. Imagine how it could change the person you're fighting with. Imagine how it could change your family's pattern of behavior in the long term. I'm not saying that prayer is the magic bullet that is going to fix all the problems with your family. Abraham and Lot had to move to different cities and were separated for a long time before Abraham took that first step of prayer and they were eventually able to reconcile with each other. As it turns out, people are complicated. And families are even more complicated. But prayer can be that first step in setting aside your anger, giving control of the situation to God, and inviting Him into that conflict. And that can make a huge difference. Thank you guys so much for joining us this week. We're going to break out into small groups so that we can discuss this more together. I love y'all's faces. I hope to see you soon. Stay safe, stay sane, wash your hands. Praying for you to wash your hands. Peace.